I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks for tuning in to another opus of the podcast built to decolonize classical music. Always a pleasure to have you among those interested in some of the conversations that are helping all of us expand our thinking around this idea of so-called classical music. Before I jump in, I want to give a shout out to Lyrica Baroque. They're an organization down in New Orleans, and they're much more than Baroque. I actually went down there to New Orleans to do some teaching earlier this year for Lyrica Baroque, and the kids that the organization serves are learning a bit of it all, musically speaking. They definitely have an expanded definition of Baroque, and they're one of the organizations out there doing the good work, as far as I'm concerned. Well, coming up down there in Louisiana is the NOLA Chamber Fest. It's a collaboratively presented 5-day festival by Lyrica Baroque, the University of New Orleans, and the New Orleans Friends of Music. The festival includes performances by world-renowned chamber ensembles, a chamber music competition, master classes, and a creativity day for local aspiring musicians. The national competition features 3 divisions: junior, high school, and emerging ensemble. Prizes include cash awards, paid residency opportunities, mentorship, and advising from Eastman's Institute for Music Leadership. Repertoire requirements include at least one work that must be composed by an underrepresented composer. Original compositions are encouraged and celebrated. See what I mean by expanded definition of Baroque? Early registration for NOLA Chamber Fest 2025 is December 13th. You can register your ensemble by 11:59 p.m. Central Time on December 13th to take advantage of half off your registration fee. Visit www.nolachamberfest.com for more information. Thanks to Jaron, Robin, and everyone down at Lyrica Baroque for your continued support. Hope you'll check them out. So this week, I'm excited to feature my recent chat with acclaimed flutist, vocalist, and composer Nathalie Joachim. Nathalie was one of the featured composers at the Afromodernism concert that I went to about a month ago, featuring the New York Philharmonic. Nathalie also hosted an accompanying chamber music concert at the Museum of Modern Art a few days later. That was really, really incredible. Nathalie is a brilliant mind who shares some of her background as a human and as a musician. She shares her take on this idea of Afromodernism in classical music and lots more. A real honor to have had the opportunity to chat with her. To get us into the dialogue, I'll share a snippet from a work of hers titled Kuti Yo. Nathalie is the featured vocalist here alongside So Percussion. Hope y'all enjoy these tunes and hope y'all enjoy my chat with the one and only Nathalie Joachim. More on the other side.
Expectations necessarily, but I know that for myself, so much of my practice is really rooted in understanding human connectivity, and therefore is kind of inherently reflectant of stories, past, present, and hopeful future. And for sure, I spend a lot of time looking back to find new ways to move forward. And so I like to think of myself as definitely like engaging with stories of the moment, but also really relying on the past to inform new and hopefully, hopeful ways of moving forward, if that makes sense. I think that rings true for me in this moment that we're living in this world, and also how it resonates for me as a Haitian American, as somebody whose ancestors really are perhaps the only people to really sort of successfully, truly disrupt the things that continue to ail us today. And so, I have a deep, I feel a profound responsibility myself to do that. That is in the fabric of my artistic practice. But it isn't detached from the past in any way. In fact, it's very deeply guided and informed by paths that have been set for me by my ancestors many, many moons ago and continually.
So how does self-maintenance and self-care fit into all of this? How does Nathalie make sure that her cup is filled and so to speak?
Well, we're recording this a week after the election. And I can say that since then, I have spent as much time as possible being in community and in fellowship with my friends and with my family, with people who are sources of love for me, sharing meals with one another, holding space for one another, spending time with body workers and healers to help sort of work through a lot of what is being held and also brought up in my body in this time and space. And that has been really rejuvenating, I think in beautiful ways. I know that it's maybe temporary, but I have to say that I got to Monday, at least this week, feeling like that helped quite a bit. It actually did help me to remember that I've spent a long time building community and being supported and surrounded by family who are deep wells of love and hope for me. And I do really give a big shout out to all of the therapists, all of the wellness workers, all of the people who are able to even have access to those kinds of resources. Because I think that it is so important that there are people who are caring for our minds and bodies. And those are the things that are most endangered in moments like this. And so I feel that's how I've been coping. Do I do that all the time? No, but I can tell you, certainly I've been doing it intentionally every day since last week.
We're going to talk about your recent collaborations with the New York Phil here in a bit. But, when you're using this word community, I'm thinking about my experience in those spaces and how it felt like community, people talking to each other. I had dialogues with people who had never engaged in orchestra before, and it really felt like there was community there. Are you able to feel community from the stage when it comes to audience and performer relations? Does community show up for you in that way at all?
It does. I mean, it depends on the stage. I mean, I
Sure.
think it's true that the audience that was present for the New York Phil performances was notably different than their usual audience. And, I think that I'm a big believer that, you have to invite people to feel at home in spaces, and it does appear that was able to happen. And one thing that I know for sure, of course, having lived through the pandemic, is that kind of fellowship, that particular kind of social contract, what happens between artists on stage, what happens between artists and audiences, live audiences, is something that is irreplicable, right? That irreplicable. Like I meant to say that, I found myself. I remember those, like the sea of Zoom performances that we did during that time. And I remember feeling so deeply emotional the first time after that stretch of time, that I was not only on stage with other musicians, but in space, sharing space with audiences. It's very rare in the way that we have constructed society. It's very rare that we gather in space with just the sheer intention of creating something beautiful and sharing in something singularly beautiful together collectively. And I love that time of isolation really showcased that for me as an artist. And so I value it really, really deeply these days. It does mean a lot. Not all audiences are as welcoming, and not all musicians and artists on stage or within their performance practice engage in that way, like are really fully committed to the social contract. But my most fulfilling artistic experiences are ones in which it's clear that that is actually the contract that everybody has agreed to in this space, and there's nothing else quite like it.
I agree. I agree. I've had the pleasure of being in the audience for your performances in so many different places, from Big Ears to Washington, D.C., many, many, many places. And it was different for me to engage you as an artist at the New York Philharmonic, not as a performer, but as a composer. And I think it's really interesting that you're an artist who doesn't let either go. You are a performer and you are very much a composer. I wonder why it's important for you to continue to engage your talents as a flutist and a vocalist alongside composing for other performers.
Yeah, I mean, to me, those two things, I don't see them as separate. I see myself, in fact, like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that there are people for whom the craft itself is the thing that they're chasing,
Mm.
to be the very best composer or orchestrator or performer in any given right. And I recognize more and more that that is uninteresting to me. It's not actually the thing that I'm after. I'm certain, and I know for sure, that there are better composers than me and better performers than me. But it's sort of the practice itself, the act of like sort of chasing something that is in maybe intangible, right? But like the act of sort of discovery that happens through making, that's interesting to me. And so all of the facets of my artistic practice that allow me to do that feel essential. So I think that if I only focused in one area, I would be losing some piece of that, the piece of the toolbox that allows me to be on that journey of discovery. And so it does feel really sort of intertwined as both pieces of, as all pieces of my practice. I think what's also true is that, like, inherently I am, not just as an artist, but as a person. A friend said to me recently that, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna adhere to this and like say it out loud for myself more. Is that he said that, like, you're such a relational person, much more than a transactional person.
Mm.
And I feel like if I were to separate any of those pieces of myself, that it would start to feel transactional instead of something that I could be participating in and fully as my whole self, and being artistically expressive is one of the ways that I'm most fluid and also most fluent. And so I don't see them as separate pieces. And I don't see myself actually chasing any kind of perfection. In fact, like I'm often making a mess when I'm making art. And that's okay to me, because there's always, I always come out of the other side of it, whether it's the best piece I wrote or not, like having a deep sense of discovery and having had my eyes opened, and it changes me the next time I step on stage or the next time I set music on anyone else. And so I think they're just pieces of a whole that are really essential for me.
Yeah, when you talk about making a mess, I think about cuisine. I mean, the kitchen may be a mess after an hour of cooking, but what you're eating is, the most delicious thing. The more of a mess you make, at least in my kitchen, anyway.
I keep a pretty clean kitchen, but it's also like, if it isn't the most delicious thing, you still learned something, right? You
Sure.
still discovered it, and you still know that why the balance of flavors is off. And maybe that's also exciting, right? The recipes gone wrong sometimes lead you to something that's like, maybe not the most delicious thing, but also interesting, like maybe
Right.
something worth looking deeper into, right? And so yeah, it's that part of the journey that's most exciting for me. And sometimes I step closer to the thing as a composer, and sometimes it's the performance part of me that steps in to like get me that one step further. So they all feel like, again, sort of like essential tools in the toolbox of like artistic and personal discovery.
hmm I'm going to pull on this thread of your being a very relational person. I had the honor of featuring Alison Loggins Hull on TRILLOQUY a couple of years ago. And I asked her about the secrets or her approach to maintaining an effective working and personal relationship when you have, human interaction in that way that's also artistic. I wonder if you can speak to that, the maintenance of working and personal relationships, not only in your work with Flutronics, but in the way that you've developed and maintained relationships with presenters and performing organizations.
Yeah, I mean, on the person to person, artist to artist level, it's of course easier. It's easier to see people like uh I think that that's true. Like I think that's also one of the powerful things about storytelling to some extent, right? Which is such a huge part of my practice is that like we're able to sort of digest and find ourselves in individual stories. And so relating to people like as individuals feels really positive to me and feels important. And that is sort of like, that I think is a calling for me. Institutions are harder, because like more often than not, they have this sort of rigidity about them that doesn't always allow for person to person relationships. I think my most successful ones have worked that way, where they are really willing to sort of release some of the rigidity of the red tape around what can and can't happen in a space, and are excited about the possibility of working in new ways, right? Which every single artist will bring, and so does require a tremendous amount of flexibility. I think that I have. I wouldn't say that I've mastered that. I think I've had successful relationships with institutions, and I've had ones that feel heartbreaking, to a certain extent, because I take my work very seriously and also so personally. But yeah, I think that like what I do is just lean into that where I can, right? Lean into it really deeply where I can. And institutions that are less flexible, finding the people, whether it's like that one person in the back of the orchestra who you can say like, I really loved the way that you played that. It's like so exactly the spirit that I was going for. And then suddenly you see the performance sort of brighten up, right? Because they feel seen as a singular person. Or, for example, right now I'm a scholar in residence at the Museum of Modern Art, and the relationship that I have with Leah Dickerman, who's the head of the research department here, is one that has been fostered over many years. This was in our first interaction. This fellowship isn't our first interaction. In fact, it's like been a part of a long building relationship with the two of us personally, but also with the museum. And so, and an opportunity to like allow for time and space to get to know one another. I also felt that way when I was making Femme d'Haïti with Kate Nordstrom at Liquid Music, that it was like really clear that she was excited, not by the most polished thing that I could give her, but by this idea that I was like wanting to just search for, right? What would it be to do a project about women from Haiti? What would that mean for me? And how might it come together? And I might need a lot of time and space where I'm not actually writing music for that to happen, right? There's a lot of like trust involved in that kind of space. And I think that like trust and respect are the things that sort of have to remain in balance, right? The second that you are no longer in a trusting relationship with either a person or an institution, or the second that it's clear that the understanding of respect and honor in the space, we have a saying in Haitian Creole that's like a kind of greeting when somebody greets you with honneur, which is honor. The response to that is this bid that they're offering you respect in response. And I feel like that's such a foundation of how I like to be in relation with people and with institutions. And so, there has to be a sort of, I don't know that I don't know that I master that. I know that I try to lean into it where I can find it. You don't always find it though, and like, the world as we're all experiencing can be a heartbreaking place. And so it can be tough because I operate from a really like heart open space.
hmm Yeah, this issue of trust is something that always comes up with the composers that I work with through orchestral new music readings. They'll, come to the collaborations with a sort of fear of the musicians, I won't say an unwillingness to connect, but just not sure what that connection looks like between composer and musician. So, of course, I soften things out, but it's interesting for me to notice that as a through line, just that lack of initial trust. Of course, there are so many things that have to happen for a composer to even get to the point of collaborating with an orchestra. And that's what I wonder what you can speak to. I mean, there are composers who never bother to write orchestral works because of how rare an orchestral performance is. How did you manage to break into receiving orchestral commissions and orchestral performances? Again, considering the difficult it is to even be, the difficulty there is to even be in that space.
Yeah, I won't say that I sought it out. It's not, orchestras are not the most flexible of institutions, but, and so the very first of my commissions, all of them have come to me in strange ways. The very first one, was actually a piece that by some strange, odd I don't know, turn of the universe. I wrote a piece for St. Louis Symphony and their In Unison Choir, which is like a collection of Black church choirs from throughout the city of St. Louis. That has just been like the piece that no one has ever heard as of yet because the choir got COVID
Oh no.
it was about to premiere, and now St. Louis is redoing their hall, and so it will happen eventually when the hall is done, and it'll be great. But I think that actually came because the In Unison Choir had, their beautiful collection of singers. Not a professional choir, but again, a sort of collection of community choirs, church choirs from throughout the city. And not all professionally trained musicians, but they can sing. You know what I mean? They really sing from like a deep place in their spirit and heart, and it's so beautiful, right? And so, I think to some extent, like that being my first orchestral commission was such a beautiful experience and I think that they came to me for that reason. Like in some way, that particular commission was perfect for me, and that the choir itself afforded me the kind of like they learned that way, right? Like
Mhm.
most of our musics are not learned or taught in like a classroom where you're studying it. Like that's like when you're in Haiti, when I was learning with my grandmother, it's about like that fellowship that brought us together, right? Being
Mhm.
encouraged to like join your voice with other people. And so the choir themselves, like I ended up being a kind of bridge between like that world and the orchestral world, like knowing that they needed something very exacting and like,
Mhm.
the perfect score and needed to look at like that. And so I think they came to me because of my compositional spirit in that way, that like it was oddly enough an orchestral commission that was like both rigid but allowed for a deep sense of fluidity and building of community that made for a really beautiful work. And I think that, that's true too of like this commission with Seth, which was, a consortium commission amongst a handful of orchestras, but really the start of it was like Seth and I's friendship. It's not the first piece that I've written for him. And, it was a continuation again of this relationship that has been building over time. And I think that the consortium that came together was willing to invest in that, right? Willing
Mhm.
to invest in what was clearly a fluid and strong and trusting musical bonds that already existed outside of the orchestra. And so, I don't know. Again, it's like, working with orchestras is challenging because there's limited time and there's limited resources, and it all has to happen so fast. It's like it's like ultra transactional, right? The way that it ends up
Mhm.
having to happen. Even if the musicians themselves are really giving themselves to the work, it's just like the nature of the beast. And so I don't actually, it's not my preferred way of working. I don't seek it out, but I think that I've been very lucky to have mostly opportunities to write for orchestra that have allowed me to engage on a personal level, and to have them see me really, and
Mhm.
to also be able to do my as best as I can to see them as well.
Yeah, huge shout out to Seth. You know, the first time I met him was a couple years ago. He was doing playing a festival in Minnesota where he played an ice cello. I had never heard of anything like
Oh
that.
yeah.
So the innovations out there, you know, even blow my mind as someone who spent so many years in the industry. You know, when you talk about the difficulty of working with orchestras, I think there's also a challenge just around the social politics of an orchestra at times. You know, one of the things that I was really proud about, happy about with the Afromodernism concerts was that I actually knew about them. And, you know, in New York City, it seems like there's always more going on than you can have in front of your face. But promotion of this concert was certainly right in front of my face. Billboards in Harlem, Upper Manhattan, where I am. So that's really what encouraged me to come down and to take a look at what was going on. On the other hand, there were lots of people who felt like it was very limiting. They didn't like the idea of Black music being on one concert. It should be integrated, for a lack of a better word, throughout the season. Now that these events have taken place, I wonder how you would encourage or engage people who are more on the challenged side of this programming. How do we engage the conversation, validate the perspective, but also still try to invite?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the people who are challenging it for good reason. I think I agree that it shouldn't be just one concert. Whether that concert happens during Black History Month or not, I think it
Right.
should be more integrated. I think also that there needs to be, great attention paid to the curation. Like it's not enough just to put Black artists together.
Mhm,
Not all of us go together like that, you know? So I feel like I actually really loved the concert that I was able to moderate here at MoMA
mhm,
for that reason, because of course George Lewis is just such an adept curator, and he really is very thoughtful about curation in that way. And he is an advocate for Black artists, but he also doesn't he never does that thing where he just like lumps us all together for no
right.
reason. To me, the program itself was so cohesive, and you saw a real sense of curatorial point of view in the program itself, while also offering like a very diverse array of Black artists, right? And so to me, I would hope that some of these larger institutions that are sort of struggling with this idea and struggling to think about, there's like capitalism is at play here, because many more often than not, they're thinking about their bottom line. What about their subscriptions? What about their,
Right.
what about the people that are just like really need to hear all of the maulers? Like, and I get it. They do have to also keep it's the world we live in. Capitalism is the underbelly of where we're at. And so, but I encourage them actually to engage many more thinkers and curators like George, like myself, like many other Black artists who are not only making but thinking about curation of work that really features us amongst other Black artists, but also like in a greater sphere of thought. I think that one of the things that came up a lot with this title of Afromodernism is that there is this distinction between what we consider to be modernism with a capital M, with no
Mhm.
distinction both the head of it. Right, there's a reason why Afro needs to be added in this context, and wouldn't it be interesting? I think if you put together like more modernism points of view on the same program, whether they were all Black or not. But wouldn't it be nice to think more sort of broadly in terms of our understanding of like why it is there has to always be this sort of separation of church and state, why
Mhm.
it should be that the Black audiences are only invited to the Black concert. I saw the posters around the city myself, and my family. I grew up in Flatbush, and so it's like I had never seen New York Phil posters down there before. I certainly saw them this
Yep.
time, and it's true that the outreach was quite different. But wouldn't it be amazing to also think about what it means to like broaden the exposure while being inclusive? And we've a long ways to go before that happens. So to the people who are on the challenge side, I don't blame them for being challenged by it. I think that's a real feeling.
And I would argue that an engagement of modernism that leaves out blackness is incomplete. What is modern art,
Right.
modern society without the I mean, it's, certainly here in New York City, you can't go
Exactly.
anywhere and not really see the hodgepodge of just different experiences. And I feel like I agree. I think modernism should reflect that. It must reflect that if it's going to be reflected accurately.
Agree.
At both events, we sort of touched on this earlier, at both events at MoMA and the New York Phil, I met audience members, Black audience members for whom this was their first engagement of something like that. It also makes me think about going to see the premiere of Fire Shut Up in My Bones at the Med. I also enjoyed seeing Malcolm X, audiences that felt very much like New York, maybe even Harlem in some ways. But having us, I'll say, at a space like that is very different than having us at a concert featuring all of the Mahler symphonies. Well, we don't have time for all of the Mahler symphonies, but but a more quote unquote typical concert experience isn't necessarily where you'll see audiences like that. Do you see programs like these as a bridge? I mean, how do we sort of connect the experiences between Black music and typical programming, or should we think about these programs as a bridge or a jumping off point?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't have all the answers. I think I just continue to go back to this thing of like welcoming people into a space so that they can feel at home there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when that happens, um, it happens in such a way that you try to cater to what you think
Right.
they are asking for. And I think we have to have more faith in audiences than that. To some extent, I feel like they're, especially I want to say like in an orchestral space, I think that there are ways of making where there are Black musical concepts and ideas that are being sort of transduced and translated to be presented in what they presume will be predominantly white space, which might have us which might have us as Black people in this space sort of receiving the music in a strange way, like that feels actually like a sort of repackaging and reselling of something that is quite familiar to us. And so I think there has to be like, as a bridge, maybe yes, but I think that there also has to be a lot of faith placed in audiences that they are also excited about having their horizons expanded, right? And that already happens in like traditional programming. Like
Sure.
it's very rare that you go to an orchestral concert and it's all contemporary pieces, right? That like almost never happens. They almost always do a little bit of like, here's a flashy opener, here's a symphony that we know you love, and here's a little something new, just in case, right? And you have a lot of listeners that are like expanding their palette in that way, that like maybe they're like, I don't know if I like that piece, but in this context, they start to see it very differently. And so is it possible for us to like have some trust and also, offer people new flavors, new ideas in ways that like has us trusting that they can expand their palette. So I don't know, maybe that's not really answering the question, but it's like what I don't like to see is when there is an all white curation of a Black concert that is like what they think Black people might want to see. And like, this is the moment where it happens. And so this is the day that all the Black people like flock, like how to continue to invite us into your space in a way that also like respects our intelligence and offers us something that creative and artistic institutions should be offering us, right? Things that sort of like push our notion of what we quote unquote like, right? Like and the more that can happen, the more and that's true historically of all kinds of classical music, that much of it was not palatable at the moment that it was made, but has since become a deep part of the canon. And that's only because of the advocacy of the organizations and like continuing to like engage audiences in something that then becomes familiar to them, right? And so it is, I think, their responsibility to sort of not tiptoe around how they're programming and diversifying their programming, and to include it much more often so that it doesn't always have to be, so that it can always be a mixed bag and so that people can always feel welcome, right? Wouldn't it be nice if Black audiences in Harlem or in Flatbush always felt like, maybe today's the day I'm going to go to the symphony because I can, and I'm like, I trust them enough and they trust me enough to know that like this will probably be an enjoyable experience that I'll also feel included in.
Right. I mean, I certainly have dreams of just being able to walk down to the Apollo or any giving hall and seeing an orchestral performance without riding the train downtown. But I think that's a longer term conversation. I definitely agree with you there. As new as an orchestral space is for many first time audiences, especially first time Black audiences, the one thing that we come to the table already knowing how to do is getting dressed. Like we know how to shine up, how to put on our best. And this conversation actually came up a bit in your pre-concert chat at the New York Phil. For folks who weren't there, I wonder if you could just reflect on that aspect of the conversation a little bit. How does attire and general presentation play into your artistic practice and connect to this broader conception of Black culture and Blackness?
Well, this particular piece itself was inspired by Black dandyism, which is a fashion movement, right? One that is global throughout the diaspora. You see it throughout the continent and the Caribbean, and of course here in the United States. I think in particular, sort of like the outburst. I mean, and Black dandyism. What I loved about it, what I was drawn to about it as a point of departure, is that it is something that Black people have been harnessing all the way back to Frederick Douglass and probably predating that, right? This idea of co-opting and like regaining control of what our public image is. For Frederick Douglass to be dressed as a sort of like elder statesman, as a formerly enslaved person, rocked people's social understanding, social consciousness of like what a Black person even was, right? And you see that come up, of course, in the civil rights movement here in the United States. You see that come up if you look at like Pan-Africanism, when you have liberation movements happening throughout Africa, beginning in the 50s and heading all the way through, apartheid South Africa, that there is this idea of presenting ourselves in our own vision, in our own way, in order to sort of rock the social underbelly that says that we are maybe not even human, right? And so, and also to draw attention to the atrocities of like how we are treated as respectable, dignified people showing up in society in this way. Of course, Black people, I think everywhere in the diaspora, like you said, have done what they have done with everything else, from our music to our food, that like fashion is something that we've also taken so deeply and like been reimagining over and over. It's gone beyond this idea of like being an acceptable, not just an acceptable public presence, but one that like individualizes you, right? One that says a lot about who you are. And this idea of like Black stylistic expression, and like how that is fueled and how that is like sort of such a deep thread, no matter where you look throughout the African diaspora, that in fact became the inspiration for the work itself. And so, of course, it's hard to translate fashion into sound, but what I could do was try to draw from as many styles as possible and innovate them, right? And that was actually my real goal with the work, was that I wasn't in fact trying to do a sort of caricature of these styles as they exist in their original form, but to draw from them and make them new, the same way that my grandmother would take an old piece of fabric and make a beautiful new dress out of it. Like, how can we present ourselves with flair in dignified ways that also singularly says, like, I'm here, right? And so I think that is like such a deep part of how we're brought up. I think it's such a deep part of how I tend to express myself, especially like in a world that is sort of continually, telling us that we're not, or that we don't belong, or that we aren't here, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's such an important it's an important part of my personal expression. But I loved that it ended up being the point of departure for this piece. And as we know, this year, like the Met Gala theme, and has been an inspiration and continues to be, right? And I love that it's having its moment to be showcased in this way. But yeah, I feel like obviously it's a big part of how I walk through the world. And I love going for the unexpected, but also really allowing myself to be seen in these spaces that again are often actively trying to sort of mask our presence.
Mm-hmm. Well, for what it's worth, for the sake of decorum, I didn't snap and give you a yes as you came out in your red, but it was certainly internal. So incredible look. So what's next for you? What's coming up that you're excited about?
Yeah, like, as I mentioned, I'm currently scholar in residence at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, and as such, I believe that I'm the first like full creative practitioner, like non-traditional scholar that has been invited into the space. And I'm working on a large-scale evening-length project that will premiere in several seasons. That in and of itself is really rooted in this concept of liberation. It takes the Haitian Revolution as a point of departure, and what we often talk about is the culmination of the revolution and its aftermath. But what I'm really interested in is that the start of the revolution, 13 years before the culmination, began at a voodoo ceremony at Bois Caïma. And there, enslaved people and Maroons in Haiti decided that they, instead of reaching for a new hierarchical system where they replaced their enslavers, they sat together in fellowship, in spiritual fellowship, in musical fellowship, bringing with them, reaching for what they had carried with them from the continent, our dance, our music, our storytelling, our spirituality, in order to define new principles of how life in this world could be, right? To remind themselves of what was possible. And what I know to be true is that if you look at liberation movements throughout the diaspora, those tenets are there, right? Spirituality, storytelling, and artistic expression are at the underbelly of all those. So this project will investigate that, and will, of course, it will. I don't know. I'm making it, so that's the thing I'm most excited about making for the next couple of years. And I'm really excited about the discovery of the research of that, like what the through threads of those are. Are there even are there musical gestures or ideas that seem to recur? That's a lot of what my research at the museum is about right now. And also looking at other artists, Black artists, Black surrealists, Black modernists who have done that very same thing, right? Reached back in order to like rethink something completely, to dream something that like is seemingly impossible, right? A new way of looking forward. And that kind of the tension between those things is actually what's guiding the work. So I'm really excited about that. I also, this past summer, recorded a new album of two pieces that deeply investigate what it means to be hyper connected in an ever isolating world.
Mm.
And I recorded it's two large scale duos for myself and my colleague Yvonne Lamb on violin. And we recorded those. I also I filmed this past fall, just last month, I filmed a film that will go with one of the pieces, 30 minutes. And so there's a film that will accompany it, and that'll be coming out soon. And those are the things that I'm working on now that I'm excited about. I have another violin concerto on the horizon for Melissa White, who's an amazing
Oh yeah.
violinist in the Harlem Quartet. And Plutronics is recording an album in January of a piece called Black Being. That's a large scale 50-minute double concerto that we wrote for us and originally for Cincinnati Symphony that we'll be recording with Chicago Sinfonietta in January, which I'm really excited about. So those are the things on deck. I'm on sabbatical from Princeton. I'm enjoying the rest of my sabbatical, which is good. But I'm excited to get back there in the fall too. And yeah, so those are the things.
You're really living the dream. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We started by talking about the times, and that's where I'd like to end. The biggest thing that I'm thinking about right now, post-election, is this phrase, "Oh, that'll never happen." I remember that phrase being used in 2013 and 2014, just a few months ago, and it's often proven wrong. This idea of "that'll never happen." I've been trying to flip that around into a positive spin, and instead of saying "that'll never happen," saying "this is possible," or we can do this. So I think regarding the future of our art form broadly, I wonder what your biggest dreams and visions are. What do you see as being possible?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I always go back to to me, as a Haitian, but also just as a Black person, like obviously, anything is possible, right? I think that for us, especially as Black artists, as Black people existing in the world, it is a miracle that we have continually survived the challenges that we have faced, many of them utterly unthinkable, right? And so I have a deep penchant, and it's perhaps why the thing I'm reaching for in this moment is what my ancestors reached for in that revolution, right? Like thinking of this MoMA project of like, I can't imagine what it must have felt like to be standing at world's end in that way and to have had the ability to draw upon what has been given to us again and again, right? This idea of coming together, of believing in one another and believing in something bigger than all of us, and making sure that our stories continue to get told through music, through song, through dance. And I find myself reaching for that. And I do believe that like it's a miracle that we're here. And I have to believe that we'll continue to do that. That strength is what put us here, and it is what will have us here for many more generations to come.
Flutist Rachel Mellis there performing a work for flute and electronics by Nathalie Joachim called Aware. I performed some jazz in California with Rachel once upon a time. Always great to hear from her, and a pleasure, of course, to enjoy music by Nathalie. Really appreciate her coming onto the show, and shout out to everyone at the New York Philharmonic who helped make this conversation possible. All right, so for this week's Trilloquy, I'm going to read one of my latest social media posts. I found myself scrolling yesterday, and I came upon a photo of a group of Black women sitting on top of a building watching the city burn, with reference to the fact that 92% of Black women here in the U.S. did not vote for the incoming administration. I think the idea is that Black women did what they could, and now it's time to watch it all burn. I took a look at the comments of this photo, and there were lots of affirmations of sitting back and doing nothing. This narrative that we did what we could, so at this point it is what it is. I don't know why that bothered me so much, but it really did. It put a damper on my entire evening, and it tried to anyway. And it reminded me of just giving up. As far as I'm concerned, we can never give up. As long as there's been in America, there's been resistance to it. And as tiring and even maddening as it is to keep pushing against something that doesn't seem to budge, my feeling is that we have to continue to do it. Now, of course, this is by no means an interrogation of how Black women feel or how Black women should feel. All feelings are justified and valid. And it's also true that if any of us throw our hands in the air and say, fuck it, those who oppose peace and happiness for all living people advance that much more. Anyway, here's what I decided to put on socials. Maybe I should make a, a poem or something out of this, but here it is. I saw this image on my timeline earlier today, and I can't stop thinking. I can't stop thinking about the hurt and violence that so many Black women have felt and experienced in this country since its inception. I can't stop thinking about the completely valid and justifiable feelings that gave birth to this image. I can't stop thinking about those who end up winning when Black women let go of the reins. I can't stop thinking about the unfair physical and emotional labor cast upon Black women in our society, especially when we don't listen to them. I can't stop thinking about Black women who refuse to give up, like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Marsha P. Johnson, Harriet Tubman, Angela Davis, and my mother. I can't stop thinking about the Black women who will die when we decide to let it all burn. I can't stop thinking. I can't stop. I hope you won't either. Thanks again for tuning in. Happy holidays. Talk to y'all again soon.